All right, welcome back to another amazing episode of Stargazer. Today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my new friend, Tamra Lucid, who has written an absolutely tremendous book that I want everybody to read. And it's called Making the Ordinary Extraordinary, My 7 Years in Occult Los Angeles with Manley Palmer Hall. Welcome, Tamra. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
Oh my God. So I have so many things to ask you and so many things to gush over because I'm serious, guys. I am not being paid to say that I love this book. I loved this book so much, Tamra. It really, I'll tell you why. Number one, I'm from Los Angeles as well. So the sort of lore of Manley P. Hall has always been extremely attractive to me, very magnetic, very mysterious. The occult scene of Los Angeles has always been one of my interests. When I got into magic and the mysteries, for me, it was more from this perspective that Manley P. Hall was coming from. I wanted to know what the meaning underneath religion was like, and my interest in astrology was so profoundly blossomed by his perspectives. Like, if it weren't for the secret teachings of all ages, I wouldn't have started to understand astrology at a deeper level. Like, he is the one that really opened my eyes to like the deeper symbolic layers. And I'm really grateful to him for that, but not just astrology, like religion. And yet I feel like I didn't know that much about him. And he's always seemed very distant. He's like been a distant star. And I've listened to his lectures, I've read his books, I've quoted him in classes that I teach, but still, I didn't feel like I knew him that well or could like kind of get any connection to the human side of him. He seems this like very, and I know he didn't like this, but he seems very deified and distant. You know, there's just that quality of him being like a monument to something. And so reading your book made Manley P. Hall come alive and become so personal and so endearing and so touching. And for me, it was such a delight that you brought him to life for all of us. And you painted this really beautiful historical portrait of Los Angeles not that long ago, but things have changed so much. Like
dramatically.
like the essence you captured of this city and the way you were reflecting on the world that these old people, because Manley P. Hall's in his 80s at this time, you're reflecting on their reflections, their nostalgia, their remembrances. And I just thought it was a tremendous piece of historical memoir and a really loving book. And when I was reading it, I fell in love with every single person that you introduced, your husband Ronnie, and all of the people that you featured from the Philosophical Research Society. So thank you for writing this book.
Thank you. That was so flattering.
Oh my God. No, it's really great writing. And that's the other thing. I love literature. I'm also a writer. Your writing is so great. It's just it's evocative, it's sensual, it's philosophical, of course, and it's poetic. It's all of the things that you want in a memoir. So thank you for writing this book.
Blush.
It's true though. I mean, you must have put so much work into it. You must have reflected for a long time to be able to transmute your experiences into this work of art. So I wanted to ask you, when did you decide to write this book? When were you friends with Manley P. Hall, first of all? And then when did you decide to write this book? What was the gap of time that elapsed?
Oh my God. So we were friends from the early 80s to about the middle 80s.
Okay.
So there's my 7 years, but not until about 2018 did I decide to write it. And it was because Arthur Johnson, the guitar player in the book who worked with Lena Horne and Streisand and Tim Buckley and all those people, he was in his transition, and he would call us on the phone and say, now look, don't make the same mistake I did. I have stacks of paper and writing and poems, and it's never going to get published. No one's ever going to see it. And he really focused on me, which kind of shocked me. And he said, and you had a relationship with the old man, the way Arthur always liked to refer to him, the old man, that was really unique. And your experience there was incredibly unique, and your perspective is amazing. You should do this. And, you know, the funny thing was that Ronnie and I had been working with Waris Hussein on screenplays. And Waris Hussein is this magnificent director. And the first director of the Doctor Who series in England, first director of color for the BBC. And we just, through a mutual friend, started working with him on a couple of screenplays. And so our writing chops were really on. And then COVID hit and we had nothing to do. And we thought, well, then apparently the writing is up to bat. So let's start the writing. And I said, I want to write the Manley Hall book. Maybe I should do this right now. This is, so I did. And it actually, the funny thing was that I had kind of written it in a facetious way because I was very uncomfortable about writing it at all. And I had made it funny and put a bunch of barbs in there specifically for Arthur to read and laugh at. I just wanted, you know, it's a musician thing. And I wanted to make him laugh, you know, okay, here's your book. But still, you know, he's a poet too. So I wanted it to be beautiful. And then he passed away just days before I got the book to him. And then I felt, you know, I lost my friend. And God, I wanted him to see the book before he left. And so, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a sad moment. But the book actually, after that, I passed it around to a few friends, female writers that I knew. And they all got really excited about it and started getting very, you know, Arthur was right. You should write this book. In fact, this is very important. And it was like they were echoing what Arthur was saying to me. And I'm like, oh my God, he's got all these, he's united all these women. And all these women were saying, you need to write this book and write it well. It's like, all right, I will do that. And so the book was born. And the funny thing, I didn't think it was going to get published either, but that was another matter of happenstance that occurred. And it kind of shocked me. It still kind of shocks me that the book got published and it's actually got a cover and people are reading it, and it's shocking, really. That it wasn't what I expected to come out of the lockdown of COVID, that's for sure. But there you go.
It's always nice when there's a silver lining to a dark cloud, right?
Yeah. Something good shall come out of it.
Yes, and I am glad. Maybe you needed to settle down, get really grounded and still to have this come out of you. So I'm glad you used the time so wisely. I think a lot of people wanted to do something like that, but didn't. But you actually pushed through. That was a heavy, difficult time, and it was not very easy to be creative and to do the things we have to do. So, you know, bravo for actually cutting through all that. I know that wasn't entirely easy, but you know, the story is, I imagine it has a sort of life of its own, it sounds like, with all of these people kind of pushing it out of you, like guiding you.
Yeah,
And
the encouragement from the women involved was astonishing, and it was yeah, I'll always be grateful to all the women. I tried to thank all of them in
yeah,
the thank yous, but they were so magnificent and so encouraging, and y- they helped a lot. It was like well, it was it takes a village kind of moment, I think, for
mhm,
women, a woman thing, perhaps.
definitely. Definitely. And it sounds like you're in the right circle, you know, you have the right friends, which is so
Mhm.
important. But I understand why your friends were encouraging this, because I agree that it's an important story. I agree that I feel like in like I said, the lore of Manley P. Hall, there has been missing some heart. There's so much head, and there's so much acclaim, and there's so much prestige. But what you brought to the figure, the historical figure now of Manley P. Hall, was like deep, deep heart and soul. And that has been missing. And maybe I'm a little bit wrong, but you told the story, a story that I've never heard. And you told it from the most like beautiful, blissful, tender moments as a very young girl, having met this grandfatherly figure, all the way up to the tragic end. And so it's operatic in that way. And I just want to kind of go through the timeline of the story with everybody, because it starts out when you are what, like 20 years old, like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And so you meet Ronnie when you're a young girl hanging out in Hollywood, partying, and nihilistic young girl. And I actually have to say, I have never read an account. I've never read a love story account that reminded me more of the relationship I have with my husband, Andre.
You're
Um,
kidding.
no,
So
we
funny.
were so similar to the way you guys were. We were from broken, messed up, fucked up homes. We were really angry, drinking hard liquor, total nihilists. We were just like, we found each other. And we were like, I used to say we were like natural born killers, which is a really hyperbolic say. But what I meant by that, in that hyperbolic way, was that it was us against the world, fuck everything,
Yeah.
around each other. And when I was reading about how you and Ronnie met and how you were in your adult youth, it was so sweet and it was so touching. And yet you found yourself reaching for deeper meaning in life. And you started going to the Bodhi Tree bookstore, which was just so classic. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what that was about? What did you find at the Bodhi Tree bookstore?
We found the big book. So we found the secret teachings, but we couldn't afford it. It was very expensive.
I bet, yeah.
And $50. And we were poor. And nihilism and poverty seem to go together.
Yeah.
And so when we finally got the money to bring it home, of course, just looking at the thing, it was so magnificent. It was like the 6th edition. And, it really was, as far as the big book goes, it was a small version of the big book.
Yeah.
But it was all aged looking, and just, the physical book itself was just so deep and so impressive. And so, that first time, I think it was the first chapter, and we read through the first chapter, and it was very exciting. And I understood at that moment, I will never be able to be able to recite that title. But thank God they just call it the big book or the secret teachings. After reading that first chapter, I said to Ronnie, this is great. I like this stuff, and that guy, Manley Hall, how long has he been dead? And Ronnie was like, it must be a long time, because, this is an old book. This is 6th edition, So we later found out from a friend that he was in fact quite alive and apparently quite the looker when he was a young man. And we ended up going to the PRS and really loving the place, just falling in love with PRS and liking Mr. Hall even more than volunteering.
Mhm. God, it's so exciting. I mean, I felt so thrilled for you guys because my experience of finding that book was like, he is dead. He is dead. But here's the thing. What I never knew was how he died. I just assumed, well, he was old, he died. You know, I never asked any questions.
Yeah.
Until I went to PRS. It was closed for the longest time. And when I was in school and when I was in like undergrad and I was studying religion and anthropology and stuff, all I wanted to do was go into the Philosophical Research Society and see what they had. I just wanted to go in so bad, but it was closed year after year. I don't even know how long. It was like just not an option. And then finally when it reopened, I went in like 2019 and I saw Mitch Horowitz speak actually. And I'm sure you know him, but he gave actually a very nice lecture. Really freestyle, freewheeling, chill, but very respectful speech about his the inspiration that he's taken from Manley P. Hall. And he wrote a book about him as well. And he was the first one to mention that there was a bit of a tragedy at the end of Manley P. Hall's life, which really broke my heart. I had no idea. I'd never thought about it. I just assumed that he grew very old and died. But your book really went into it a lot more than Mitch Horowitz did. He kind of skimmed the surface of that and gave me enough to feel the weight of it. But that was a really exciting experience, even getting to go there in its present day form. But I was just like so enamored with this story of you guys just going, let's go, let's go to Sunday lectures, 90 minutes. So what was that like when you were hanging out there and you're listening to him talk and he's just extemporaneously flowing? What was it that like came alive in you? What happened when you became a regular audience member there?
Well, partly it was just a fascination with the subject matter. He always knew these lectures were always fascinating. The details, the incredible depth of knowledge that he brought to each lecture. Beautiful voice. I loved his beautiful voice. Sort of a Lionel Barrymore meets FDR meets W.C. Fields.
Nice.
And genuine, you also got the impression that he was really doing something he loved, which was sharing the information that he found fascinating and sharing the beauty of the stuff that he enjoyed studying. So it seemed like speaking in those lectures was one of his greatest joys. It's just, the man was born to do just that, and he did it brilliantly until the very end.
I'm glad that you got to feel the sincerity in his teaching. And I was looking at his chart, and I do whole signs, so if it's slightly different than a chart you've seen before, that's why. But he's an Aquarius rising, moon in the first house. Then he had 3 planets in Pisces: Mercury retrograde, Sun in Pisces, Venus in Pisces. So as an Aquarius rising, the ruler of his chart is Saturn, and that's in the 12th house. And he also had Chiron and Jupiter in the 12th house. So he was like a 12th house person. And there's a lot to the 12th house, but one of the associations with the 12th house is this idea of sanctuary, actually being most at home in a place that is outside of the world, where you're not necessarily concerned with individuality and citizenship and egoic concerns. Rather, you let that go for the joy and the pleasure of getting to open up to the infinite, getting to open up to something higher. And so the idea of sanctuary isn't really built into modern civilization. We don't have that so much anymore. But to me, I'm seeing what he built, that library, the lecture hall, was a sanctuary.
Yeah.
And, and that's what it provided for everybody that was going there, which is why I think
Also his behavior.
Yeah.
He had his office, he had his lecture room, he had his home, he had his one restaurant, but he had been doing this for years. The same tables, the same streets, the same places, and in a very, very condensed little like square. So I can see almost that theme of a sanctuary. It sounds like monastic life would have been a-okay with him.
It would have, here's the thing, like, he was such a sensitive person, obviously. And I don't mean that to sound like he was a weak person. What I mean is that he was so hyper perceptive, almost like he didn't have any skin, but still had to touch the world. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And that's what made him so intelligent and so perceptive about the mysteries. Where was I going with this? Well, okay, so he has the most debilitated Mercury you could have, which is so interesting because he was such a celebrated scholar and great writer and speaker. Right, so he's got a retrograde Mercury in Pisces. So Pisces is a debilitated placement for Mercury because it's exalted and it's the ruler of Virgo. So Pisces is as far away from Virgo as you can get. And then the retrograde on top of that all, which is so interesting. And I was like looking at that thinking, wow, he's somebody who had his intellect directly tapped into his imagination, directly tapped into intuition, into that wordless primal level of consciousness that only speaks in images. And that's why he could pour through these dusty old books, as his wife described, like pour through these dry, dusty old books and see through the words to the deeper meaning, which is a struggle for most of us. We
also think about the aspect of he's looking back at all the old books, and bringing them forward into a sanctuary.
Yep.
We're going back to that theme of this, so you've got that Mercury going after in the retrograde Mercury going after the past.
Yep. Very true.
Providing sanctuary, the secret teachings of all ages in one handy place, in one book, a sanctuary.
Oh my God, that is so true. Very, very true. Oh my God, a good way to look at it. So yeah, he had this need to create that, and he offered it to other people selflessly, which is so cool because you could have this kind of energy and be sort of like a miser that like holes up in their castle, but no, like he wanted this to be for everybody, which is also a 12th house thing because the idea of the monastery is a 12th house expression. And the monastery is not just for the monks, it's for people. It's for people to come be healed, to do trade, to send the sick there if they need a place to be taken care of. It's certainly a place where people can come pray. It's a place where criminals and exiles can be protected from the law. I mean, there used to be that kind of notion in the world. So yeah, he has that quality. And the retrograde debilitated Mercury, I was so fascinated by. And this is another.
That's the one I keep going to is like, ooh, that Mercury, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and he's like one of the greatest minds. I mean, when he died, he was called the greatest philosopher of the 20th century. You know, like things like that were like commonly said about him. And I guess you could argue, you could dispute, but a lot of people think so. And whether or not he was the greatest doesn't really matter. He was one of the great minds of the 20th century, one of the greatest aggregators of the sacred texts that he compiled in that library. He did so much mercurial work. And I feel like what was so cool about, you know, people born with Mercury retrogrades often get, they often have a difficult childhood where they get told that they're dumb or that there's something wrong with the way they talk or the way they think, and they develop like a complex. But, you know, people with Mercury retrograde are not dumb at all. I mean, this is a complete misunderstanding of what that means in the chart. What it means is that the person is more tapped into the subconscious. Like, I feel the best metaphor to describe it is a seed that when it germinates, instead of trying to break through the topsoil and reach for the sun right away, instead it works on its network of roots down deep to get very strong and mineral rich before it ventures upward. And so it's like, you know, somebody with a Mercury retrograde, my husband has one, so I've been studying him, you know, they have a different perspective on things because they come from a deeper layer. They're more tapped into that, like, again, that primal level of consciousness, that symbolic awareness, that intuitive aspect. And in your book, you're always describing how he's like so at one with the Tao, which is very beautiful and so Piscean, you know, so Piscean. And that's true of his Venus placement in his sun. The other thing that I was looking at, like, he's here to build a sanctuary. But the sun in Pisces towards the end of the sign is also, it describes somebody who knows how much sacrifice it really takes to live, actually, just to be incarnate is like this tremendous sacrifice for the end of Pisces, because it's that end of the zodiac. And so much has to be yielded to the start of the new cycle. So much has to be let go and released at the end of the zodiac. And so, like, he has this quality of being incredibly generous and sacrificial, actually giving himself entirely to this project, to this sanctuary, right? And that was hard for him. That's what I see in the chart. That was actually a tremendous sacrifice, because a lot of people crave tons of attention and the limelight and fame. And I'm not saying that it's that he didn't enjoy getting attention and praise. Everybody does. We're all human. But it would be extremely painful for him to have all eyes on him, all of this attention all the time, people just trying to get, you know, down his throat, up his ass, trying to touch him, own him, grab him, just be a part of him. Like, that whole thing would have been agonizingly painful. So for him to continue to lecture every Sunday, to hold this sanctuary down, to care about the people that were coming to him asking for help, to do everything that he could to spread a philosophy of, you know, not self-help, that sounds lame,
self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah, thank you. Like, that was that in my opinion, looking at his chart, that was a really difficult but beautiful experience for him. It was agonizing but also blissful.
Well, it was funny because although he never said it to me, he hated firing people.
Oh yeah.
If somebody had to be fired, he would duck. He'd duck out. He'd leave. Couldn't handle it. Could not handle it. And it was very difficult for him. That's why I think he got us as screeners, to go through all the people that needed and requested his help, because some people it wasn't appropriate, or he couldn't really help them with what their problem was and try to guide them some place appropriate. And you know, often it was just do a letter that says this, do a letter that says that. No, I can't do it in person. He tried not to turn anyone away if ever possible. So that very much coordinates with what you're saying.
Yeah. A very soft-hearted person.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I see. A very gentle soul,
Yeah. Yeah.
deeply gentle soul. And you know, that Venus in Pisces, I feel like it's the hopeless romantic, the gentle soul that actually does. The weakness of Venus in Pisces is that they want harmony and beauty more than reality. So firing somebody, like even if they're incompetent, it's just going to be like, I can't, that would be mean. You know?
Yeah, it's a harsh reality I want nothing to do with.
It's a harsh reality, exactly. And that is the only weakness of Venus in Pisces, is that like romantic, sentimental, delusional quality. Other than that though, oh, computer sound, sorry. Other than that though, like Venus in Pisces really does have this ability to bring dreams into reality.
Yeah.
The imagination becomes this like incredibly magnetic force. And I suppose it is for everybody, but when you have Venus in Pisces, it's made so much more powerful, that connection between the images we're holding and what we're drawing to us. And so he did really have a gift for dreaming of something and making it happen, which of course, what he accomplished in his life was pretty magnificent. He really made a lot of dreams into a reality. And by a very early age, like you met him when he was in his 80s, he was pretty accomplished in his 30s, you know, like.
Yes, extremely.
Yeah. Like he had done a lot. And I wonder if that is not an influence on you, because it seems like when I just glanced at you and your husband Ronnie's resumes, I don't know what the right word is, your accomplishments, I'm like, God, these people are busy and they're really you know, widely, there's a wide scope of your accomplishments as artists. And you know, you're also a documentarian, you're also a musician, you are politically active as well as spiritually alive, as well as artistically fulfilled. That's a pretty big deal. Not everybody gets to blossom in all of those ways. So
I'm the world's greatest enabler.
How so? What do you mean?
That's what being a producer on a documentary film is.
Okay, I like that.
You're just the world's greatest enabler. It's somebody has a brilliant idea, and this is more, you network, you get them in touch with other people, or you find a place where they can get the resources they need to accomplish what they want to accomplish. If they need a soundtrack, I know musicians. If they need, you know, film, well, we can figure it out. You know, if you need money, okay, we can do a GoFundMe. Whatever it takes. You know, sometimes it's just people needed me to make phone calls.
Yeah.
All right, I'll do that. You know, let's do that. I'm a producer.
Yeah.
So
I feel like your mentorship when you were young, very young, before your Saturn return, which is significant, with somebody like this who took you under his wing. And that's the beautiful thing about the story as it unfolds. For those who read the book, you will really appreciate how swiftly you guys are sort of swept under the wing. And it really is like that. Like there's all this love in it. Just Manley P. Hall and his amazing wife, Mad Marie, who I do want to talk about, because she seems like somebody that I would have gladly been friends with and happily listened to her go on. like, what an amazing woman. We'll get to her in a sec, but both of these old people in their 80s, they swept you two young nihilists under their wing and started having you over for dinner and just being there for you and guiding you and supporting you and encouraging you, getting Ronnie to start lecturing, which I was amazed by in the book. Like, how did they do that? How did they draw that out of this young man? Like, how did they do that? What great teachers.
Right. Well, he had a natural inclination for study and a curiosity about poetry philosophy, mysticism, Eastern philosophy. So also he had or has, Mr. Hall had a photographic memory. I think flat out, that's what it is. Ronnie says he does not have that, but what he's got is pretty close. So I think Mr. Hall just kind of recognized he's smart. He's obviously talented. He's a quick study. I think he'd be really marvelous at this.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a natural. I believe it was Pearl and Edith who came up with the idea of Ronnie being able to lecture. And then they kind of slid him over into Mr. Hall's office, suggesting, what do you think, Mr. Hall? And Ronnie did have a talk with him. And he told Ronnie, if you want to lecture, I suggest you do not lecture with notes. Know your subject. If you don't know the subject well enough to not use notes, don't do it.
That's what is so intimidating, but amazing about what he could do, Manley P. Hall, I mean, and also Ronnie at such a young age, being able to lecture, because it's memory, but it's also confidence. It's a lot of things that have to come together in order to be able to accomplish that. But that's the thing about a great teacher, is that they're able to draw that kind of thing out of you. That's the whole point of being under a teacher's guidance, is that they instill confidence in you. They make you believe in yourself, and miraculous things happen,
They teach by example.
Right.
And then, of course, there's direction and all that, but definitely they encourage to go further than your comfort zone, because you are intelligent. Now you've got to develop the skills, and this is a step-by-step process.
Right. Now, Ronnie became kind of like a little bit of I guess like a rising star in the scene, and that's when you start to really understand that it is a scene and there's politics, and that's when you start getting manipulated by people, possibly triangulated by people. But there's a couple very wise women, including Manley P. Hall's wife, Marie, who bring you aside and go like, listen, honey, you need to live for yourself. Do not live in the shadow of a man. That's not your path. Do not make the same mistake that I did, or don't do what you've been taught. Please stick to, your own sense of self. And I thought it gave me chills. It was so beautiful and such good advice, because you were so young and that all was coming at you at once, and it must be chaotic and confusing. So yeah, I just want to hear about what that was like, and just, how these women strengthened you and guided you at that time.
Well, funny that I didn't put it together, much like the editors on this book. These were just women who were seeing what was going on.
Yeah.
It was very obvious. Okay, he's starting to come up in the ranks, and well, look at all the predators start swimming around.
Yeah.
And just to have these women, they probably saw me kind of looking at it all with that hesitation that says, I don't think this is going quite as nicely as it should, and this is feeling more icky than it should.
Yeah.
You always get that feeling like this isn't going right.
Yeah.
And they would, particularly Marie, just don't let him turn out like Manley. Don't let him get all swept away in all this and those damn dusty old books. and you'll lose yourself. You'll be a shadow.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be a shadow. You want to be your own human being. Be an equal, be a partner, but do not be, this appendage. Be yourself, save yourself.
That was so, what a lady, so
Yeah.
womanly and motherly, grandmotherly. I just think it's such good advice because, aside from romantic relationships, which are very easy to get lost in, you can even do that with a friend, I mean,
Certainly.
it's easy to get absorbed into somebody else's story and become the non-player character.
Or the world's greatest enabler.
Yeah, but I feel like just having people reach out to you at that time and cultivate your strength, which obviously they saw that you had plenty of your own, and they just wanted you to remember that and stay connected to it so that you didn't feel overwhelmed by that, just that gravitational pull. And I'm probably really just, I'm just like really enamored with Marie because, we talk about Manley P. Hall. I mean, she's right. He's this monumental figure, but he was married and this was his second wife, but they got married in 1950, I believe I saw. So by the time you met them, this was 30 plus years of marriage, which is longer than you've been alive, right? She was not a diminutive shadow of Manley P. Hall.
No. Definitely not a shrinking violet.
No. And one of my favorite parts of the book was when you defined her as an early riot girl. So can we talk about why Marie, who was called Mad Marie, which I feel like was probably both insulting as well as endearing, depending on who was saying it. But why did you call her a riot girl? Can you describe what a riot girl is, number one? And number two, why was this badass old lady a riot girl?
Well, she made pamphlets, kind of like a zine, little handmade pamphlets, Xeroxed, and sold them for a nominal fee. And she was someone who was very, very intent on fighting the patriarchy. She was an abuse survivor. She was not content in a traditional female role and fought stridently to avoid being that. However, she was still very female and cultivated all the Venusian skills as well, including cooking. I consider that a Venusian skill. And she would not be silenced. She spent her entire life demanding the attention of the patriarchal system to acknowledge her philosophy, her point of view, and why including women in their rightful equal place alongside men was the most important issue of the time. And until we do that, until there is equality, there will not be peace in this world. It will always be an oppressive, ugly society until that is achieved. Nutshell.
Yeah, she sounded like just super wild. She was temperamental.
Oh, very.
Definitely described her as moody and temperamental, but brilliant. The kind of female genius that is pretty rare, but there is a tradition of these wild mystical women throughout like the Middle Ages, you know, that had their own deeply intuited cosmology and this relationship with the divine that was more dear to them than any human relationship. And what is so amazing about her is that she could have been this sort of, I guess, like the ultimate groupie, just, you know, being like just so satisfied with herself that she had landed this
Right.
important man. But instead she's like always, she's always, you know, throwing shade. Yeah.
Dismissing him. Yeah, absolutely. You know, oh, Papa, you know, it's like her German accent was outrageous and it was wonderful. And she'd just be, oh, Papa, those dusty old books and those dusty old Masons and dusty old men with dusty old ideas.
Oh my
And
God.
just wave it off. You know, that it means nothing. Nothing.
Mhm.
It's just dust. They're
Yeah.
dust eaters.
Yeah.
And she'd say, now, if you'd only listen to my philosophy,
Mhm.
then we'd have a society that would be productive, beautiful, harmonious, you know.
Yeah.
And she had the diagrams to prove it. The diagrams were something else.
Mhm.
They were, that was extraordinary
Mhm.
because she had drafting tables and she would create these, they were diagrams of consciousness, literally of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it worked. You'd look at those things and go, I don't know what I'm seeing,
Mhm.
but I know I'm seeing something. She would have physicists come out and ask her about her philosophy and ask to see her diagrams.
Yeah.
She also had the FBI come out and she was considered a public nuisance, but that's a different story. Only because she wrote lots of letters complaining about the patriarchy to all kinds of patriarchy and patriarchal institutions, which made her a nuisance, much like a riot girl. They're a nuisance. Yes. Well, we don't like dusty old dust eaters.
This is the thing that made me love Manley P. Hall for real. Not just like a distant star, not just dusty old books, not just a brilliant scholar, but this was the woman he chose to balance him and to make him dinner. Like
I think she chose him, quite frankly,
even better.
and he had no choice. And that was that. She made that decision. And she came into his life. He was living alone in some dark house, and she just was, you know, that's it. You're coming with me, mister. You're going to start having breakfast first thing in the morning, getting out and getting some fresh air, like a decent German household.
Yeah.
And that's that. And that was that.
Yes. Yes. I think that's amazing. You know, the only figure from history that resonates with her is like Saint Hildegard, the great German mystic who made all of those trippy alchemical mandalas that represented the levels of consciousness she was clearly tapping into, who wrote all of that exquisite music that never got heard outside of the little black forest that her convent was in, who wrote all of these great compendiums of herbalism and such, and believed in unicorns as much as she believed in mint leaves, you know, because that's how many strange terrains she was traveling in and out of. So yeah, she's like Saint Hildegard, German, really tuned in, tapped in, turned on to something. And I agree with her in some ways. Like I really do. I appreciate dusty old books myself, but I also
I do too. I was always like, can't we keep the dusty old books? I like the dusty old books. I'll dust them off. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't hurt my feminism to dust off the books because I like them.
Yeah, I do.
Pretty.
I like dusty old books as well, but I like her attitude, which is just like, let's liberate ourselves. Like
Exactly. I think it was more metaphoric.
Yeah,
you know.
totally.
She'd let us keep the books.
Yeah, and I loved the line that you wrote in your book, which was when she yelled at him and said, all you do is regurgitate things that you read in books, whereas I'm the innovator. I'm the one with fresh ideas. That's not verbatim, but that was what I
Yeah.
remembered. And I love her. She was so cool. And she seemed to genuinely care about you and Ronnie as well. So she was a part of this circle of welcoming, and she was a part of the mentorship. It was she and he that encouraged you guys to get married and hilariously chose the date for you, which
It wasn't encouraged. She just said, they both said, you should get married. That's it. It wasn't encouragement. It was just, no, you should get married.
yeah,
Yeah.
they forced it on you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good luck with that. They just kept upping the ante. You can have the wedding here. We'll pick out the date. It was really funny.
And she wanted the son in the 10th house so that
Yes,
continue her teachings, which I thought was so amazing.
which is surprising because I seem to be doing that right now. So
yeah, well, she chose you at some level because there's very little information about her, and that's a fact. And that's kind of silly and unfair because
Victoria Jennings wrote a book, God as Mother, and she worked with Marie after Mr. Hall passed away. And she did a really great book on Marie's work. So that's someone you can look up and see if maybe that would help you learn more.
I definitely will. What I remember was you described her cosmology a little bit. It sounds like it was kind of complicated, but ultimately what I heard was it's like a Gnosticism that goes back to the idea of divine mother, just divine mother as the ultimate source of the one, the all, And I thought it was beautiful. I picked up what she was putting down in a very primal way. Space mother is probably not the term that I would come up with, but I was like, whatever works for you. I mean, I'm sure she understood this was all symbolic, shifting archetypal things anyway. So I kind of get what she's saying. I don't discount her view. I think she's onto something. And what I really liked that she said to you was that the gods forgot and fell asleep and became unconscious. And as above, so below, humanity has forgotten, fallen asleep, and become unconscious as well. And I was like, I feel that. I do feel that deeply. I understand what she's saying. I understand what she's saying. There is this like disrespect of the original source of consciousness. There's been some separation, some forgetfulness. And it's trickled down to us because we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And so, that's what I recall from you sharing your stories about Marie. And I feel like there's just so much love in this portrayal of her from your book that I feel like I know her as well. So it was
good.
Yeah, it's not like a light sketch. It's not something, it may be like brief moments, little clips, but what you strung together is a montage that actually makes it come alive, like the human being comes alive. And I feel like her spirit is very relatable in your book. So I feel that from Manley P. Hall and from her. My favorite story that you shared about Manley P. Hall was actually the Toby story. That was my absolute favorite part of the book. So can you just tell that story? Because it's so sweet and endearing.
Well, I was kind of getting uncomfortable working at PRS. So I got myself a job at a toy store. One day that a shipment came in and I saw a teddy bear, and it was around December, and I just saw that bear and I went, I'm going to give that bear to Mr. Hall. I don't know why. It was just that bear goes to the big fella himself. And I showed it to Arthur and Ronnie, and they were both just aghast. They were just shocked at me. And you don't give Manley Hall a teddy bear for Christmas.
Oh, bear thing.
Yeah. And I was like, screw you guys, he's getting the bear. And so we were sitting at dinner, and I was across the table from Mr. Hall, where I always sat. And I got you something, Mr. Hall. Merry Christmas. and I held the bear up, and he looked at it and he went, Toby. And I was like, what? He went, that looks exactly like the teddy bear I had when I was a little boy.
Ah, God. Mm.
And that stayed on his bed. I heard it was with him when he passed away. And it was there on the bed with him when they found him. So it stayed there the whole time, which I just thought was so sweet. I'm so glad I stuck to my guns and made sure Mr. Hall got the bear.
I think that's actually like a really a tremendous gift, a tremendous spiritual gift. And honestly, helping somebody reconnect to their inner child is probably the deep healing and kindness that you could ever show someone.
Yeah.
And I loved that story, not only because it showed the real sweetness of Mr. Hall, the fact that he had never fully grown up, which I think is so important to know about someone. He had his soul completely intact by that time. He had not grown so jaded and so cynical by years of being in the esoteric scene that he couldn't just become a child again. It makes him so lovable. But it's a beautiful story because it shows that you listened to the old women when they told you, just be yourself, don't listen to these men. You know your own mind and your own heart, and you have your own guidance that you're allowed to follow no matter what they say. And they mocked you and derided you. They did the whole thing, they were acting like nerds, like, oh, he's so important, you have to be the way men are. Like, I get it. I really laughed so hard because I know how men that are getting nerdy are, and they get so arrogant and so close-minded, and you really stuck to your guns, and it was pure intuition. That was like a connection, a synchronicity. You were listening to your soul, and it was in fact the perfect gift. And I feel like that's something really important about you that you were learning about under this mentorship and in this time, that you are extremely intuitive, that you can really read people. And that's why, and not just people, but you can see what is the right move to make, what's the right path to take. You can see in this deeper way. And, that was why he made you a screener, right? Like, you were asked to meet all the people that wanted to get next to him so that you could decipher and discern who was safe and who was not. Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, Ronnie he begged Ronnie to do that because there were people he wanted, he didn't want to have the meeting just yet. Could you go and have a one-on-one with them and see if everything's okay, and if they're, if this is a good person who maybe wants a picture or their book signed or something like that. Mm-hmm. Just make sure they're cool. Mm-hmm. But when he told Ronnie that's what he wanted him to do, I happened to be in the room too, and he went, take her with you.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he was pointing at me and he said, tell me what you see. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, boss. So that's how I became a screener. It was quite, all right. Now I'm a screener. Ooh, I've got a title. So,
honestly,
it
sounds fun. It sounds a little scary too, obviously, because that's a big responsibility for one. And there's a lot of freaks in the scene. So, like, in honesty, there's some really good passages in your book that like succinctly break down the archetypes of the freaks in the esoteric scene. And it's hilarious because even though I've never been to the Philosophical Research Society, well, I guess I was there once, but I don't know anybody there. I've never been in the scene. I know what you're talking about. I've met all those people. Nothing's changed. It's just
Saturday night at the Bodhi Tree bookstore, and you would have seen them all. Yes. Between 8 and 10.
I knew all of them. It was incredible. So yeah, you do see so deeply. You see so clearly. And I appreciate that. As a Virgo, I really appreciate that level of discernment, which often gets, I feel like, misunderstood as being judgy, quote unquote. But no.
That's just being able to read people, read the room.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
really is. It's being aware of what is going on,
Yeah,
being aware of what someone is really saying in their speech, the way they speak, and what they are choosing to speak about. But it's just simple perception.
yeah,
A lot of it.
yeah, exactly. And your book demonstrates your gifts in this area and also tells the story of where your gifts took you. So you're a screener and you're meeting all of these different types, some of them amazing and some of them really weird. There's all kinds of people that just want to get next to Manley P. Hall so they can touch him, get a photo, the celebrity stuff, right?
Yeah.
So then you meet this guy that you call Fritz. So what was that about? Who was Fritz and how did that unfold?
He was, his name was Daniel Fritz, but I only call him Fritz.
Okay.
He came out of a group that we saw who there was a religious leader that wanted to meet Mr. Hall, get a photo op with him.
Mm-hmm.
But when we went to visit this man and see one of his lectures, it was creepy. It was just downright creepy. The people there that were working for him, they were really close to Heaven's Gate. They just all wore sweaters and the same haircut, male, female, the same haircut.
Whoa.
It was very uncomfortable. And the lady who was saying, well, I'm the one who introduced you to him, and why don't you sit up front, and all these other things, trying to coordinate us.
Mm-hmm.
She was disappointed that we were representative of PRS and Mr. Hall, and we didn't want to stay there very long. It was nasty.
Mm-hmm.
And so and she even got very aggro about us leaving. Where are you going?
Mm.
Don't say that to 7 planets in her sign. I'm going where I want to. And so we were told that someone from this group wanted to meet Mr. Hall and have a consultation. Sure. Okay. So why don't you go meet him? And he just, something was wrong there. He tried to present himself in the most perfect way. As a Virgo, you'll appreciate this. It was too perfect.
Yep.
Said too many of the right things, too many of the right ways, had himself presented in a bizarrely set up performance-like moment. I just didn't like the guy. Bad feeling.
Yep.
Kept seeing him, saw him another time, warned this guy, I don't think so. He went away. We heard he went away. And then again, he shows up and, now at the same time, we were being told by Mr. Hall, look, you guys, this is great, but we're all really old here, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
We're all going to be dying soon. Mm-hmm. I'm going to die. Everybody around here that we're all going to die. You best be on your way. You better find your life out there.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be too tough for you. This is not what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And we were dragging it out, but at the same time, we were still functioning as screeners and doing certain jobs. Mm-hmm. But this guy kept showing up. Well, a couple times into it, I had said, don't let this guy in. Don't let this guy in. There was a third time, and the third time, I don't know why, I snapped. Mm-hmm. And instead of being the, happy, calm person that I used to be, I started getting really upset. Mm-hmm. and bargaining, and I basically went through the 7 stages of death. I was pleading, I was demanding, I was threatening. And finally I started crying, and I yeah, overt emotional scenes. Really, Mr. Hall did not like that either. And I did one, and I started crying, and I said, this guy's going to kill you. And Mr. Hall just put his hand up and went, enough.
Mhm.
And I knew I had just absolutely blown it.
Mhm.
And Edith was standing looking on and horrified that I had just become Mad Marie. I was crazy. I went nuts.
Mhm.
And Ronnie was just, he was stunned. He was also upset about Fritz too, but I was just, it was basically go. I mean, Mr. Hall didn't say a word after enough. And I was just, I knew I lost my job. I knew we weren't coming back.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Ronnie realized it at that moment, but I just, I cannot tell you why I said that, but I did. And that's how I lost my job.
Mm. It's a tragic story because you were right.
Yeah. And then that sucks to be right.
Yeah. And to feel like, I'm not saying that anybody gaslighted you on purpose, but just to feel gaslighted by the universe where you're like, why did I say that? I have no reason or no cause. And then to have, how many years later, like what year was this that Fritz showed up? Just out of curiosity.
So that was probably 87.
87. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
then in 90 is when we found out Mr. Hall was dead. I guess 1990.
so Fritz
So
was,
it was, we weren't, we weren't in the loop. I think the Fritz years were a few, I'm fuzzy on it, it's still, I realized when I was writing the book, I was like, I never processed this. It's so, actually, there were moments with the book where, after I was facetious, for art's eyes only, now I was really telling the story, and I was like, oh my God, this really happened. And I also, one of the things that made telling the story difficult, and what even now I'm like, was the fact that it was to me, it was the biggest mistake of my life. Had I only been more poised about it, or rational, or whatever, that maybe I could have been there to block Fritz, to stop him. So I felt like this was one of the most epic fails in the history of mankind. And, hey, that's my story. Gee, why did I not want to tell it? That's also the other thing I realized.
oh,
So, I actually had a friend, Stephen Ross, who I mentioned in the book. He saw the book, and that was the first thing. He was like, Tamra, there was nothing you could do. Okay.
yeah.
You shouldn't, don't feel that way, which
Oh.
was awfully sweet. But, yeah, there's a part that feels like I should have dug my feet in and fought,
Oh my goodness. You poor young thing. And even up until, later years, after much wisdom and experience, to have that kind of guilt trip put on yourself that you put on yourself. It makes a lot of sense, of course, because that's how humans are. Like, it seems,
Yeah.
well, I think any of us would do that, because when we grieve somebody, even if it's just a separation, which that's what it began as, you're not seeing them anymore. Your surrogate grandparents are now out of your life. And that's got to have been traumatic, actually.
Mhm.
Call
Yeah.
it what it was, traumatic, such a loss. And then 3 years later, approximately 2.5, 3 years later, to know that Mr. Hall actually does die under suspicious circumstances, in the hands or in the care of this creature named Fritz. So that's traumatic. And I don't know, the only way that we can deal with trauma is we get stuck, we get reactive and we get stuck on these tape loops.
Mhm.
And, it's like your mind's just trying to figure out what happened. You're trying to solve a problem that couldn't be solved. And of course you blame yourself. Also, Capricorns tend to do this. To put a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. But I feel like when I was thinking about it, I was like very conscious of, first of all, Mr. Hall is an astrologer, a better astrologer than me. He knows astrology very deeply. He knows his chart. He knows what's going on with your charts. He knows what's happening in the cosmos. And that doesn't make him infallible, but he's thinking like, it's been 7 years. That's one Saturn square. These kids have got to get out of here, before their Saturn return hits. Because I think he's like getting very serious about knowing that, number one, if you go through your Saturn return and you're stuck on this rock, you're going to get like cemented to it. You're going to be like one of these people that, not that there's anything wrong with those people, that's their path, but he sees that you guys deserve to be liberated from this like cenotaph. Essentially, it's going to be like a monument to something that was, rather than a living place very soon. So I feel like that pushing you out of the nest thing that he did was the deeper wisdom. And yes. I believe that you could have gone hysterical, and if he wasn't trying to push you out of the nest already, he would have invited you back. I really think that, like if everything was cool and you still had your purpose there and he wasn't trying to free you guys, I'm sure he would have forgiven you and invited you back. But he probably thought, like, what a remarkable opportunity to make a clean break, because I need these kids to go, because if they go through their Saturn return here, they're going to get all crystallized at this place. And I want them to like mature and crystallize in their own vibe, have their own life, not be one of these people that are trying to cling to the past. And like he was, like he was right. All those people were going to die. And the scene, that's the thing that I was really reading into it. I'm like, the scene was going to get ugly. And you did describe that I forget his name, the man that worked with Live Nation and the Olympics and the arms deal.
Mitchell, I think is his last name. I forget his first name.
He's like, look, I've worked with arms dealers. I've worked in diplomacy. I've worked in the music business where it's all cutthroat and like low vibe. And nevertheless, this is the worst group of people I've ever tried to work with.
The women.
I'm like, so the politics were going to get really Machiavellian and really ugly. And I feel like he knew, like, okay, we're coming to that phase where it's coming to the end of my life. They're coming up on their Saturn return. Actually, your Saturn return was his Saturn return, right? Because Saturn in Capricorn, right? So he's like, we're coming up on the Saturn return and they got to go. And so I feel like he just saw that as an opportunity to let you go. Now there's a lot of speculation about whether or not he was actually just a fool, or he was actually just, never a wise man to be conned by this person. But I think that's a terrible thing to say about somebody.
Yeah, that's they don't understand professional murderers.
And how it's just very disrespectful. Like we don't.
Yeah, isn't that a wonderful thing to say? Well, you're looking to dismiss somebody to say something like that. So there you go. Good for you.
I didn't feel that at all. I feel like what was going on in Manley P. Hall's chart, though, was very interesting. And around this time, so it started specifically in 1980. It did start in 1987, but 1988 things really took a turn. So I don't know, since you weren't there, we don't know exactly how this relationship went, but it was essentially a con artist who got in really close and became the caretaker of both Marie and Manley P. Hall, right? Both of them. He was kind of like just looking out for them. So as I said in the beginning, Mr. Hall is a 12th house person. The ruler of his chart, Saturn, is in the 12th house, Capricorn. It's conjoined to Jupiter. There's also Chiron there. The 12th house is the house of sanctuary, but it's also the house of hidden enemies. And so as mystical of a place as it is, as tapped into the unconscious as it is, it's also this place where unexpected sorrow, unexpected dissolution, and hidden enemies come in. Now, these hidden enemies could be aspects of your own psyche that are unintegrated.
Right.
It can be people that come to, challenge your evolution. So this was Mr. Hall's third Saturn return. We can't say he was not wise, because he was definitely wise. Not many people make it to their third Saturn return.
Yeah. Takes a bit of wisdom right there.
Yeah, but the 12th house is a murky place. And so I was looking at this and I was like, looking at the timeline. I saw that starting in 1988, the beginning of 1988, Saturn moves into his 12th house. So this begins the Saturn return for him. And at the same time, there is also Chiron moving into his 6th house, which is the house of health and healing. So suddenly something is challenging his health a lot, which makes him a lot more vulnerable to needing care, needing help, more dependent than he might have liked to have been. Physically, literally in the nervous system, rather than I'm sure he had health problems before. He was pretty old, but this was something sensitive came up. Some like old malady, some old wound would have come up in like the summer of 88, which would have made him pretty vulnerable to needing help. So if there's a con man that's around and is like, oh, I'm here to help you, I have all the answers, I'll be there around the clock 24/7. Sociopaths are extremely charismatic and they're very helpful. So no doubt at first, this person is extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And Mr. Hall has something wrong with him physically, for real at this time. And I don't know what it was, but then, Saturn is crossed into Capricorn as of February 13th, 1988, and it begins coming up on his natal Chiron, which is at 4 degrees. So this is also putting a lot of weight on his own Chiron, which is an ancient wound from childhood. And so there is that kind of like life review process that we start doing at the end of life, and so he's definitely at age like 89, 88, 89, you're really looking back on your life. And there may have been something from early childhood that came back up that was vulnerable. That doesn't mean that he's going to let somebody evil into his life, but there is like stuff that's really touching on his vulnerabilities. There's Chiron opposition in Cancer. Then there's Saturn on his natal Chiron. Then on the next day, February 14th, Uranus crosses into Capricorn. So we've got Saturn and Uranus conjoined, crossing into the 12th house simultaneously, which is extremely tense to have Saturnian and Uranian energy together. Those two energies, for the listeners, are very oppositional. Saturn is about limitations, restrictions, foundations, walls, traditions. Uranus is about breakthroughs, explosions, revolutions, paradigm shifts. And so when they come together, it creates such a tension. It's almost like a nuclear bomb inside of a facility, like somehow contained. Not that you can contain it, but like if you could contain a nuclear bomb, if there was an implosion rather than explosion. So this enters his 12th house. And I see that, this is all creeping up on a conjunction with his natal Chiron. And then this all gets triggered by Mars moving into Capricorn on February 22nd. So this is all in like an 8-day window, just boom, boom, boom. All this malefic energy coming into his 12th house of hidden enemies and self-undoing, as they used to say. And also it's triggering his childhood wounds. So suddenly he's feeling extremely vulnerable. And on top of it all, there's Neptune, which is crossing his natal Jupiter. Now, I look at his natal Jupiter as something that would have protected him throughout his life in a strange way, in many ways, synchronistic ways, from the truly malefic tendencies of the 12th house. It's almost like he had a guardian angel there. A lot of sorrow was avoided because of that Jupiter placement. And he could focus more on the building of his sanctuary. And he was good with people and good at managing the things that he needed to manage so that that could be built. And there was a lot of help, like you, the screeners, a lot of people like filtering things for him. But with Neptune crossing that Jupiter, it's almost like that starts dissolving the power of Jupiter to protect. It dissolves the guardian angel energy. And that makes things more permeable, like things open up to attack. And the thing about Neptune is that it indicates all kinds of things: mental clouds, confusion, deception, drugs, so it's always a possibility that if somebody was trying to manipulate him, he could have been giving him drugs. I mean, that's a very Neptunian thing, to get somebody under your spell, under your control. Neptune without drugs could still be something hypnotic, some kind of way of getting a hold of somebody. And this gets very slippery in 1988. And there's this malefic pileup in the House of Hidden Enemies. So he's got serious problems at this time arising in terms of who to trust. And it would have broken down boundaries. It would have broken down barriers. It would have made it very, very vulnerable to control because of Neptune. Things get very slippery here. Neptune on top of his natal Jupiter was something that was going back and forth throughout these 2 years leading up to the death date. And it got triggered like almost exactly in August of 1990, around the time that he died. So Neptune is a key in this. Neptune on top of his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It was really, really vulnerable. And that had never happened in his lifetime because Neptune moves very slowly. So he had his Uranus return because he was so old. He'd actually seen Uranus return to his natal Uranus. He had 3 Saturn returns, or he was having his 3rd Saturn return. He'd had his Uranus return. But Neptune had never transited this spot in his chart, never ever in his life. He had never had this test, and you can't be prepared for it. And it's so dissolved. It's so weird. It brings in so much permeability, and he already doesn't have very good boundaries because he's a Pisces. He's already so soft and open and so sensitive. Moon in the 1st house, just so receptive, very difficult to be protected during this time with Neptune on top of the planets that were actually protecting him in that world. Like the astral protection that he had was Jupiter, Saturn in Capricorn in the 12th house. He's a mystic, yeah, but he also has this like hardcore don't fuck with me energy in the 12th house that has built all of this architecture, that's built all of this. I kind of think of him like Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He's like got this plush, amazing submarine that's like all decked out with a beautiful dining hall. And he goes all over the bottom of the ocean, but in style, and like fights sea monsters, but in style, very beautiful, it's like an aristocratic lifestyle under the sea. And that's Capricorn in the 12th house, something beautiful was built to traverse that terrain. However, this is like something came in and like broke the windows and it starts filling up with water. So that was 1988 was when things got really, and when things started transiting his Chiron. Mars transited his Chiron in February. Like I said, everything's touching his Chiron. That would have been easy for him to be like, I need a healer. I need somebody to take care of me. And if Fritz is like saying he's that person, even someone who knows their own chart, he could be reading his own chart and going, this must be the Chiron that I'm looking for. This must be him. And whatever he was doing for him was probably, honestly, 80%, 90% super useful, which is oftentimes how these people operate. I've actually been in the clutches of a predatory healer, and I've been through it. And it actually, it's extremely difficult to see at first. And yes, I know I'm much younger and I didn't have very much wisdom, but what makes you vulnerable is the pain that you're in.
Exactly.
You know, I was in pain and I really wanted relief. And it's a long story that I'm not going to go on a tangent in, but I sympathize with the position you put yourself in when you need help. And it's hard to ask for help. And when you finally do, you know, it is extremely vulnerable. Like, and
Yeah,
it's easy to be taken advantage of when you're in pain and when
exactly.
yeah. So I see that. And then 1989, he's got February of 89, he's got Saturn and Neptune on his natal Jupiter, Saturn and Neptune. Plus he has Uranus on top of Chiron. So sometime like by February of 1989, he's really confused about who's his friend and who's his enemy. And I'm sure it's not just Fritz. I'm sure it's also like he's sick, everybody sees it. He's got all these vultures circling around him. And that's when things get extremely confusing. Who around me actually cares and who's just trying to get a piece of this pie, you know? And that is one of the really tragic things about celebrity in general, let alone having a legacy like this that other people want to take for themselves. Everybody's got their own idea of what this should be when he's gone. And I know that you said in the book that he actually was super down about the library. He was like, it doesn't need to continue to be what it was. It has served its purpose. He was like willing to, again, sacrifice it, like that 27-degree sun.
Yeah.
Like, just let it go. It served its purpose. We don't need to like keep it going. We don't need to, he didn't leave a will and testament that said it must remain exactly as I built it. He was super chill about it. And yet he's not allowed to be. Because in other people's minds at this time in his life, he's sick. They see that he's going to die soon. They don't know when. And they want him to sign off on their vision or give them certain pieces of it. And they're vying for power. And that man said, these are the worst people he's ever tried to work with. This political intrigue is the most cutthroat, nasty, like power hungry, gross entanglement that he's ever been involved in. So I see that it got very, very bad at this time, which probably drove Marie insane as well, because she's a mystic. She can't handle this stuff. You know, it's just like, it's such a strain on your soul.
Yeah.
And so December of 89, Uranus crosses Chiron again, and Saturn crosses his natal Saturn. So here is his Saturn return officially, December of 89. So then we get to 1990. He made it through the Saturn return, which is pretty badass, you know, pretty badass. But the days before his death are really confusing to me because he was an astrologer. And, you know, like I said, that Neptune, I'm just seeing hypnosis, drugs. And I don't know if they found drugs in his system or if he was taking drugs that they wouldn't have found in his system as suspicious, but it looks to me like it could have easily,
I think he had a botched autopsy.
Yeah.
And they had to exhume his body. Which is just Christ.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Marie got to go through that too.
Oh God. Yeah. The reason why I see drugs is because of Neptune and its intuition as well. And the intuition, this is just speculation. That's all I can offer. But he signed this. These are the dates that you gave. He signed the power of attorney over to Fritz, meaning that the entire estate and the entire library got into the hands of this man. Not his wife, not his stepchildren, not even his secretary for the last 50 years. Nobody but the caretaker that he just met.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And that was signed 6 days before he died, which anybody would think is suspicious. But what was going on 6 days before he died? That was August 23rd. That was the day that the sun entered Virgo, which is his 8th house of death, and Mercury was retrograde in Virgo. Now, this is just classic astrology, and it sometimes is silly and superstitious, but Mr. Hall would have known that you don't want to sign power of attorney about your legacy, your will, everything that you own, everything you've built. You don't want to sign that during a Mercury retrograde in your
Right.
8th house of death. No way. Like he wouldn't have done that unless he was addled in some way and had no idea what was going on. There was no way he was his lucid self and did that, because that's basic bitch astrology. That's not a time to be signing that. You'd be like, Fritz, wait a few weeks. That's
Yeah.
not the time. Like, we're not signing that right now. Mercury can be going direct in Virgo, perhaps. I'll have my lawyers look it over again, and we'll sign that in a few weeks when Mercury turns direct. So the day that was signed was symbolically, it's like he seriously signed his death warrant, unfortunately, because Mercury retrograde means that those documents were going to come, that were going to blow up in his face no matter what. They blew up in his face. They also blew up in Fritz's face, which is fantastic. Yep. Like, he didn't get away with it, which is also the joy of signing something like that during Mercury retrograde, which brings up another theory. Maybe he did know. Maybe he felt like he was under some kind of threat, and he felt like, if I have to sign this, I'm going to sign it when Mercury is retrograde, so it'll blow up in Fritz's face after he kills me. Like, there's that too. He could have known what was coming. He could have known, and perhaps was being threatened or controlled in some way that we can't understand from this side. So it was either that he had no idea what was going on, which means he was under some serious drugs or manipulation that we can't understand that made him not himself, or he straight up set a trap for Fritz by doing it on that day, because he knew, like, the sun is moving through my 8th house, Mercury's retrograde in my 8th house, this is my death warrant, and this is going to blow up in Fritz's face. So those are my two theories about that. 6 days later is August 29th. Also, Mars crossed his south node, which is interesting. It squared his natal Mars. That looks to me like something was sucking his energy dry. Like he was already being hurt or poisoned or abused in some way, even on the 20th. Like, it looks like it was a process of just being sucked dry with that Mars conjunct the south node. And then the 29th was the day that he died. And that day was the Uranus on Chiron, Neptune on Jupiter, and Saturn very close to his natal Saturn, and that it was all there, just hidden enemies being really brought forth, and in a very intense way. And it's a sad story. And that's what I see about the death day. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? Anything come up for you?
I know that Fritz was practicing weird healing.
Okay.
When he first got there, he was cooking the halls all organic food.
Mm-hmm. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. And let's see, he's making organic food for them and helping Mr. Hall lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
He was also helping Marie go online, setting her up with a computer and getting people to teach her how to use it so she could bring her work to the internet. He systematically got people away from Mr. Hall, even like Pat Irvin, who was the vice president. I believe Fritz convinced him. We heard this from Arthur, who was still working there. Fritz convinced Mr. Hall that Pat Irvin was plotting to have him committed.
Whoa.
And I don't believe that the vice president of a place can have you committed. Let's start there. Nonetheless, I think he was making him he had him in a state of fear.
Yeah.
From the details that I heard, the sketchy details. Fritz had done a birthing center for pregnant ladies to have babies with dolphins, and I think someone almost died.
Mm.
And he had to get out of town. That was in Hawaii. So there were rumors going around also at PRS after a while that Fritz was using unusual practices on Mr. Hall, healing practices. So there's a lot of suspicion about what he was doing. I don't know why, but when you said the drugs thing, I kind of pinged on that too. And what he could have easily been slipping him, who knows what. I think even certain deprivation, food, water intake, things like that with a senior in ill health, very easy to cause, as I refer to it, natural causes, if you get my meaning.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that really does correlate a lot with what I knew.
Yeah. Neptune rules altered states of consciousness that we tap into naturally, but also rules deception, sorcery, which is what drugs are when they're being used for nefarious purpose. It's
alcohol, even,
exactly 100%. It could have easily been alcohol and a pill here or there, could have even been prescribed so that there was no suspicion, but just keeping somebody under your control by keeping them unconscious, slowed down, dependent, all of these things as you described. And the isolation is the really painful part of a major 12th house transit. And he was, like I said, there was so much going through the 12th house. Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. That's a lot of 12th house activity.
Yeah.
Can isolate a person. And unfortunately, it manifested in this person who was actually isolating him through force, which is disgraceful. But nevertheless, it's one of the reasons, this is really what I picked up on in my heart when I was reading the book. This is why he pushed you guys out of the nest, because he knew he was a wise man and he knew the dark heart of humanity very well. He didn't have one, but he knew about it from having been a celebrity all of these years. And the esoteric scene is extremely sticky, because there's a lot of, as you said, a lot of unintegrated shadows and a lot of lust for power that hasn't found a home in politics. And so these people are they're unrealized senators and stuff so they they're unrealized senators, that they're people that never made it to that level of evil, but they have it in their heart. And so he knew that shit was going to go down, and I'm sure he didn't foresee this tragic end. I hope not, anyway, because what a terrible thing to have hanging over your head. But he pushed you guys out when he did for a reason, because he knew that things were going to get really dark, really twisted, really Machiavellian. And it's more than just we're old, we're boring, you kids go be young and have fun. I know that's so sweet of him to put it that way, but I think that it was a much deeper knowing than that. He was shit's going to go down and I don't want you to be around for it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he entertained the possibility that someone would kill him for his library. There was probably a lot of people that could have. This guy Fritz could have even been an assassin working for someone else. And I'm not trying to get overly conspiratorial, but you just never know. You never know, how many beady eyes, how many evil eyes were on him and his legacy, his belongings, his library, his money. Out of spite and jealousy, as well as that lust for power, which drives all, assassination.
Just basic greed.
Yeah.
That basic greed.
Yeah. Totally disgraceful and so unacceptable and really sad. But the touch that you put in the book at the end, before the epilogue, which is also beautiful, but the touch that's at the end of the story is that he had Toby with him when he died. And it's just, it's so sweet. It's so touching, which tells me that no matter what was going on, he still had all of his genuine essence was still totally alive and awake and aware. And the other thing is that, you know, to be at one with the Tao, I don't want to make this, I don't mean it to sound so over the top, but like, because he wasn't a martyr exactly. I don't mean that, but like his death doesn't tarnish who he was. It doesn't change who he was.
Not
And
at all.
I'm sure that even being murdered, he was graceful and Tao about it, you know? And I mean that. And I don't mean that to sound cold or weird. I just mean like he couldn't help what was happening, obviously. He was physically unable to defend himself. And that is really unfortunate. But I have every feeling that he managed to stay in tune with his spirit and go gracefully anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And somebody like him, a 12th house person, the really amazing thing is that he was so practiced with kind of being outside of his body anyway, that during a tremendous length of illness, even on drugs, sleeping a lot, not getting to move, being under this person's, being imprisoned by somebody, you can't really imprison a 12th house person. They are like still free in their spirit. And so whatever was going on with his body was not the full picture of what was going on with his consciousness. That's what I really see. It's not the full picture. He was most definitely connecting with higher intelligence, exploring, perhaps even leaving his body and traveling. Like, who knows? There's a lot of interesting things that happen in near-death experiences and in very sick people that are bedridden. And he was so out of body already, so mystical just by nature, that I am sure that it was not all as we fear. Some of it was blissful anyway, because he's a Pisces, you know, like
it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, like I feel like, and then as soon as he crosses out of this realm, he's like totally free, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And free of all of that, the politics of fame, you know, that's actually the real tragedy of his life, because that's what led to the murder.
Yeah.
Just the politics of fame. And somebody like him didn't really, he was really beautiful and charismatic. When he was young, he was like really good looking, you know.
Oh yeah.
Like crazy handsome. Like he doesn't even feel, he doesn't look all
movie star. Yeah.
like movie star handsome and charismatic. That Mars retrograde in Leo is like what's leading the whole chart, fooling everybody into thinking that he's like, you know, super I
dynamic,
guess extroverted. Yeah, like
yeah.
He's able to play the part, just put on the airs of the golden boy, the performer, the king, whatever they want him to be. He could play that role, but that wasn't really what was going on inside. All of that was a huge sacrifice for the good of other people. And the way that you close the book was with actually like his own words about his work. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read some of it, not the whole thing because it's rather long, but I just thought this was such a, it's like the sort of memoir of the 12th house person. He said, because of my reticence in discussing my own beliefs, I am frequently asked what religion I follow, what spiritual revelation has inspired my activities. The simple fact is that I sincerely believe that I am serving with the best of my ability the dictates of my own conscience. My daily work is my discipline, and I am making no effort to advance my own spiritual destiny. There seems to be no need to limit or restrict the normal actions of other human beings. My teacher has been the very public I am seeking to serve. Thousands of troubled persons have sought my advice or assistance, and in each case, I have gained new and deeper insight into the workings of human thoughts and emotions. And he continues to go on about how he did his best work visiting hospitals, doing funerals, weddings. You know, he was a priest. And that's essentially what he was. He was a priest. And I feel like actually a very humble priest, because that's what he was really about. And so the fame that he gained because he was just so amazing and handsome and all that, it all came together. That was the tragedy of his life. Pisces is highest highs, lowest lows, the agony and the ecstasy of life. And for him, the ecstasy was actually in like the service, getting to be a priest. But the agony was having people worship him, envy him, want to control him, want to stop him from growing, want him to identify with their order, you know, all of the things that we do to celebrities. So wow, what a tremendous sacrifice that was for somebody that sensitive to be famous like that and to keep it going, you know. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you, Mr. Hall.
Good job.
Yeah, seriously, like a lot of times we have a calling in life that's not comfortable for us, and like it's not about being comfortable, it's about being of service. I mean, that's what he said. I love this quote that you chose for the end of the book, because again, it's like a window into the actual human rather than the icon.
Yeah.
And I love that, because all I could see before was the icon, and through his lectures and stuff, which are voluminous and available all over YouTube, and I've listened to many of them. I can't even remember all the titles. There's so many. They're great, and I feel like connected to that, but it still has always seemed so kind of distant and far away. And now I feel like I know this man. So thank you so much for writing this book.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And just as a little epilogue, he kicked you and Ronnie out to go be musicians. And you started a band, Lucid Nation, and it was a Riot Girl band. So Ronnie was in a Riot Girl band, which I thought was a riot. Actually, I'm like, that is so dope. I had no idea. And I wish that I had heard of you guys. I just missed you. I think like I knew who Bikini Kill was, but it was a little bit before my time. I got into La Tigra, you know, like that was like, I was like 14 or 15 when, or 13, I can't remember. I was in high school, I think, when oh God, La Tigra's first album came on. Decepticon, Hot Topic. I forget the name of the album right now, but I saw them in concert and I loved La Tigra. So I knew who Bikini Kill was, like in a retrospective way. But I just want to hear a little bit about what it means to be a Riot Girl and what that experience was like after you left the old people and you went and jumped into the world of indie rock and art and young people. Essentially, you joined the world of young people again.
We're back with our peers. Well, it was odd. It was definitely odd. I think Riot Girl just kind of happened. It was almost like a custom made scene for me in particular. Because there wasn't the requirement of being an incredible musician with mad skills and you've got your whole image just down pat and everything's just done perfectly. It was simply, well, a lot of us are abuse survivors and a lot of us are women who are having a difficult time dealing with issues of patriarchy and inequality and abuse. It's lots of abuse. And within this circle, this genre, this group, we were allowed to be ourselves just as we are and to learn to be musicians if that's what we wanted to be, or writers if that's what we wanted to be, or simply participate and be supportive, learn how to be the world's greatest enabler, whatever our choice was. And it was almost very 12th house as this little hermetic group, and yet it was all over the place. And because of that, it was a great stepping off point for me as a musician. So playing guitar, actually, I started playing bass. I was comfortable with bass, then went into guitar. Learning to sing was terrifying for me, so had to learn to sing. The whole point of being in the band was that we were all equal, and we would all not only take turns singing, but we'd also switch our instruments. We did that for a while too. The Riot Girl aspect lasted a couple of years, and it was a good couple of years while it lasted. But the scene was dissolving when we got there. I just because we were a Riot Girl band, I got to have conversations with Kathleen Hanna. She was a big time celebrity when I talked to her, and it was amazing. Though I could still have conversations with Kathleen, and she kind of laughed at me because I was asking her, what do you do when you go into the studio? Because we were going into a studio. We'd eaten enough cereal and macaroni and cheese, and we'd afforded a really cheap session. And she talked to me for a while, and she said, you know what, Tamra, just get your Nirvana records and go in there and say, I want to sound like this. That's what you like. That's who you are. Just be yourself in there, and it'll be fine. Which is so sweet, but that was the way the scene was. The best of Riot Girl was like that. You could be Kathleen Hanna or someone like me who was a complete beginner, and we were friends just because we were Riot Girls, and we would encourage each other. And I think the support network and the kindness extended at its best was just unparalleled. It was really unique. It's a shame that people don't know the real way the situation worked out for people, because there was a lot of good stuff about it. But there was also, unfortunately, if you were a Riot Girl band, you were a target. That did make you a target. And there was always one dude who had to show up at the show and go, you don't have the right to be in a band. It's like,
what?
Oh
my God.
Stop drinking beer in the morning, put your shirt back on, and go watch one of your bands. You don't have to bust in here and stop everybody. And, that's just the way it goes. But it was lovely. There were lovely things.
That sounds awesome. And it's funny because it's like, it's Riot Girls. It's kind of this martial energy. It's forceful, but you're describing like all this love and unity and harmony between you guys.
There was some of the funny thing was, you have your fun punk set. This happened at one club I can remember, the Macondo. So everybody be moshing and having a good time, and it's a bunch of girls, and they're all, Riot Girl.
Yeah.
And then the set would be over. Everybody politely applaud, and everybody sit down on the floor and start reading. They were all reading their zines. So yeah, it was like that.
Oh my God.
Slightly intellectual.
Wow. Very cool. Very. And this was it mostly like, where was Kathleen Hanna from? Was this mostly LA based, or was it all over the country coming together? Like, was there
all over the country?
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then Lucid Nation, your band, it evolved into a different sound, different scene, different vibe. And you're still a band, correct? You still have Lucid?
Yes.
Right on. So that's amazing. You've been in the same band with your husband and who else since the 90s?
A lot of people.
A lot of people. Cool. Very cool.
A lot of people.
So if people wanted to check out your music as well as read this book, where is the best place to listen to Lucid Nation?
Where's the best? Well, there's some YouTube, there's Spotify,
Spotify. Okay, cool.
you know,
Right on.
absolutely.
Right on. All right. Well, is there anything that you would like to ask or share before we sign off on this amazing conversation?
I'm just grateful for the the kind words, and I'm so glad that you felt that way about Mr. Hall and Marie and the people there. That's actually my desire when I realized I was writing this book for real, was to just let people get to know him the way I got to know him, and it sounds like you came across, and it's so delightful. I'm so grateful for you saying all those kind things.
Oh, no, it's just a really great book. I mean, I have no reason to flatter you. I'm just sincerely moved by the story that you told, how beautifully it was composed. For those who are excited to read it, you're really in for a treat, and it's peppered with all kinds of little jewels of historical information about our favorite artists. And, like, I'm not going to go into it, but I had no idea that Mary Wollstonecraft was Sir Thomas Taylor's tenant. I had no idea. That was so exciting for me. And
Isn't that an amazing story?
yes, and I'm writing. I love the Orphic hymns. My astrology class that I teach for 6 months, called Discovery, the Art and Soul of Astrology, weaves astrology in with the Renaissance magic. And so Ficino and the Orphic hymns, everything, it's so my scene, it's my vibe. These are things I love. And your book is great. It makes a time in the city that I really love, that I live in still, come alive. It makes these people that seem very distant, very unknowable, very personal, very lovable. And you and Ronnie are very special people. Like, it's easy to feel really embraced by your love story as well. I mean, that's really the heart and center of this book, is just how beautiful it is that you were both healed by love, brought together by love, healed by love, not just your romantic love, but the love of these older people. And they made you strong enough to actually be able to stay together and do all this great art together. I think that's super inspiring. And I'm a very romantic person, and it's hard to be in this world. So I really appreciate that element of the story as well, that you guys share something so deep and so beautiful. And that's what makes ultimately the book such a happy story. So much love all throughout the book. So I was very excited to get to talk to you, and I was just like squirming all day because I could not wait for this interview. So thank you so much for reaching out and giving me all this time to get to know you and get to talk about this awesome story, as well as look at Manley P. Hall's chart, because I've never done that before, and it was really fun for me. So I appreciate you, and I would love to talk to you again anytime. If you ever have anything that you want to talk about or promote, just hit me up, because I'm always open to having a chat with you.
We rewrote the hymns of Orpheus. You might be interested in that.
What? Oh my God, would you send those to me?
It's gonna be published next year or the year after.
Oh, would you come back on, please?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really excited. That's really cool. I seriously cannot wait, because that's a big part of my practice. That's how I got into magic, was because I was like, I like poems. I like poetry. I'm not into like chanting, and I'm not into ceremonial magic. My husband loves that stuff. I can't stand it. Like, I don't do it.
It's too formal.
I just can't do it. It's just not my way, but that's fine. I'm happy for him that he loves that. But like, I like poetry.
Yeah.
And and sensual things, and that's how I get transported and enchanted. So yeah, please promise to come on when that book is out, because that would serve my readers and listeners like a million times over. So
Sure.
okay, thank you, Tamra, and yeah, much love to you and to Ronnie. He was a big part of this book as well. And I have decided to follow his astrology because I found him on Medium. You sent me his stuff, and I'm like, following him now too as a fellow astrologer. I give him a high five, and I wish you all the very best. Have a beautiful, beautiful evening, and hopefully,
Thank you, Rachel.
yeah, thank you. Take care.
Say hi to my Capricorn brother, husband of yours.
I will. Thank you.